welcome to this episode of the Blue Pioneers podcast. Today I'm joined by Will de Laszlo, who, among many other hats, is the founder of GB Row Challenge, which is this adventure that we're undertaking to row around Great Britain. Will was also the first person, or one of the first 4 people, to row around Great Britain when I believe everyone said it was impossible. And he's the founder of private equity company Agathos, who is kindly one of the sponsors of the Sea Change Row. So thank you, Will, for all of those things, for starting this amazing initiative, GB Row Challenge, for your support with our crew, and for joining me today. Maybe we can start off with what on earth led you to row around Great Britain in 2005?
Well, thanks, Kat, for having me, and I love the fact you're interviewing me, and we are sponsoring you, which is just super exciting. I think it'd be quite remiss if we weren't. 2005, I was very much inspired by a adventurer called Ernest Shackleton, who kind of did some extraordinary scientific endeavours. And but 2005, I was asked to row across the Atlantic, and that had been done. Prior to that, a very good friend of mine had died of leukemia, and I was thinking about things that hadn't been done before, and I did some research, and I found out that no one had rowed around the UK, and combining the idea of doing something that was a real adventure. There was an uncertainty whether or not it could be done or completed, and a lot of the sailing community said this is impossible because of the tide and the kind of winds around the UK. That I thought was a kind of fitting adventure to try and raise some money and awareness for leukemia and leukemia research. And so that was the kind of genesis of the adventure with 2005, when I pulled together a small crew of 4 of us, Ben Jesty, Jim Baston, who now runs GB Row, who's an amazing human being, Will Turnage and myself. And we built a boat pretty much from scratch, worked out tidal streams and currents and winds, and took as much advice as we could, and set off from Tower Bridge. And we completed it in 26 days, which was extraordinary. And
that's so fast.
It was fast. It was. We took 80 days worth of food with us, and because we had no idea of how long it was going to take, and we had a very lucky stretch of weather kind of down the south coast originally, and then we set off up into the Irish Sea, where we picked up some pretty bad weather. It's notorious for the Irish Sea, as we've experienced, but it was a quick time, and it did intrigue me about whether or not it was beatable, and obviously has been beaten subsequently, as all records should be. But it was a proper adventure, and one that fundamentally inspired the genesis of GB Row, because it was the idea of getting 4 of us in total of kind of relatively kind of diverse backgrounds. Jim was a sergeant in the British Army, had never rowed before, and I was kind of like, other people can do this, and that was the kind of like, okay, can we do something that is an event with a purpose.
And what's the hardest thing about rowing around Great Britain as opposed to something like rowing across the Atlantic, which a lot of people sort of think of as one of the toughest challenges you can do? I know there's a bit of back and forth about what's really the toughest challenge, but what is it that makes Britain stand out as something that's hard to achieve?
The hardest thing about any challenge is building a crew and finding the right teammates to do it with. But other than that, I think the weather around the UK is extraordinary. It's beautiful, but it's extraordinary, and the tidal streams are challenging. Then it's not impossible in any, which has been proven time and time again. But it's a thinking person's kind of race, and I think the transatlantic is very much the tidal, not tidal currents and the prevailing winds very much. Of course, you have adverse conditions where wind pushes you back, but it's the prevailing tides and winds drive you across the Atlantic, and that it just didn't appeal to me, if I'm being honest, in terms of big sea for long times and doing something that had coast and nature and the UK. And there's something really special for me when we were doing it. It was like, these are places that I've heard of all my life. Kind of from Land's End to John O'Groats and Cape Wrath, and actually going past them, and then for eternity, I'll be able to say to my kids, I kind of rode around that little island. Which turns out it's actually quite a big island, but when you're running around it.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to the tides being one of the big challenges. I think, there's something about only being able to make about 2 or 3 knots of headway, isn't there? And then suddenly, if you've got a tide against you that's a couple of knots and a few knots of wind as well, and you find yourself spending 6 hours trying to stay still or go backwards as little as possible.
Exactly. Kind of grinding it all, and then the reverse. Then the tide suddenly picks you up, and you're doing I don't remember the fastest 10 knots in the opposite direction, which is kind of exciting. So it's amazing.
Yeah. One of the defining features of GB Row Challenge as it is today is the collection of scientific data as we go. So we're collecting eDNA, microplastics, sound, temperature, salinity. And that seems like something that's really pioneering in this space. It's an amazing program that you've set up. How did that come about?
I think... So when Jim and I decided to kind of see if we can set this up as a race and an event, again, I talked about Shackleton at the beginning. A lot of the early explorers it was scientific adventure as well as adventure, going into the unknown and collecting, eggs and samples and temperature and, soil samples that all can be brought back to the UK and evaluated. And I think so, I guess a huge part of the inspiration came from that. And then the kind of question of what's important to collect. And that's, I'm not a scientist by background. Climate change is here. It's really real. I absolutely believe in it. And collecting fundamental kind of data is really important for scientists to be able to evaluate and interpret. So the kind of thesis was, okay, well, what can we do that's helpful if you're kind of rowing around the UK? And then that it kind of expanded into, you may be able to collect some temperature. Okay, that's kind of easy, and put a probe in the rudder and collect some temperature. And then it's like, maybe we collect sound as well. And then it built from kind of like microplastics. Okay, that is a huge topic, which was hot at the time when we were kind of thinking about the idea. Original ideas were kind of like, maybe we'll just collect water sample, bottled water, and we'll just collect 15 or 20 bottles of water, and then we'll come back and get that evaluated. And then, of course, ideas grow and build and expand, and innovation happens when people like yourself or kind of John come in and say, well, what about this and what about that? And I think building a great project is actually about the team itself that come together and coalesce around an idea and improve it and innovate, and that's been extraordinary.
And the significance of the university, I guess, is that all of that data is sort of properly analysed by scientists and peer-reviewed and published so that it can have impact. What do you hope to achieve through the data that's collected?
First of all, collecting it is the hard part. So if this is spiking an interest in you to collect some amazing data and have an amazing venture, absolutely get in touch. I suppose what do we want to achieve kind of longer term is impacting UK policy on how we're dealing with rivers and from... If you can change it at a central level of government, and then that filters down into adaptations with organisations, then they're changing their own behaviour. So not kind of allowing kind of waste to go into rivers that then obviously flows out into the sea, and then with huge amounts of kind of marine shipping, how can we put in changes to adapt. How shipping is kind of circulating and kind of going in and out of the UK. But ultimately, for me, that all leads back to kind of policy change, government-led initiatives. So if GB Row has a small impact in helping shape the direction of that, I think that'd be incredibly exciting. And the first evidence of that is starting to come through as we have our first years of data. Now we've got 2 years of data, and you're going to be the third tranche of that data collection. So you've got this comparison year on year of is it getting worse? Is it getting better? And then all the scientific stuff that you'll be able to talk about better than me, of kind of cross-pollinating those data sets for temperature over microplastics, over sound, over eDNA, and marine conservation areas, how things have kind of been impacted and how things are changing over time. So I think ultimately, I hope that we could achieve some policy change and informing governments about this is real and this is amazing citizen science. Normal people going out there doing something totally extraordinary, not only self-achievement, but then achievement for the scientific community. And that ultimately, government officials and policymakers need to have data to make good decisions. I hope that this will be providing that data for them to be able to make some sound decisions.
Amazing. Yeah, that's definitely what we all hope to be part of and contribute to as well. So actually one of the things I should have mentioned in the beginning is that you've actually rowed around GB twice, and that you and I were in the same boat together in 2022, Team Albatross. I was the gender diversity in that boat. I was the one woman in the team of
amazing
6 rather above average size men. I remember asking the team sort of, whether they felt it would have been different if there hadn't been a woman on board, and a sense that it wouldn't have been hugely different, but maybe some of the, maybe it toned things down just a little bit in terms of the,
bravado,
the
atmosphere,
some of the bravado, exactly. But I also remember really clearly that, the dynamic of having different types of brains on board. And, I remember actually when we got back from the row and we're trying to figure out how to take the boat back down the Thames, and everybody else had talked it all through and basically got to the point where we were sure there wasn't a solution. And then you rocked up and just looked at the problem from a completely different angle, and said, well, of course, have you tried, have you knocked on the door of the Marine Police down the road? There might be a solution there. And I remember that so clearly because it just was such a great example of having people who just look at problems from completely different angles and come up with solutions that other people wouldn't have thought of. I've sort of taken that forwards whenever I've been thinking about putting teams together or anything, that you want to have people that have different views of the world and different perspectives.
100%. And there's no one way to solve particular problems, and sometimes you have to have kind of external input to challenge what's currently in place, and also kind of come up with just look at things differently. And I think being very neurally diverse myself, or just on the spectrum of severe dyslexia, which is only something recently that I'm starting to talk about more, much to the thanks of the founder of this business that we're looking at. You do look at things differently, and partly because you've had to crack problems in a different way, because you haven't been able to do the kind of linear thinking that a large proportion of the population do. And I think 10% of the UK population have some form of kind of neural diversity, or it's probably more than that. And so therefore, at a board level, or if you're any business that's creating products or ideas, if you want to be more inclusive, you've got to have that represented at the highest level.
Yeah, no, I see it with the Sea Change team as well. Now I think it's the fact we could go out for a really grim weekend like the one we just had, and spend a night at sea in the pouring rain, in the wind, with half the crew throwing up, and get back to land and everybody's like, cool, great, we learned lots that time, looking forward to the next time, and hopefully we'll sort of make some tweaks and it won't be so bad, but that sort of idea of giving up has never really crossed anybody's minds, which is pretty amazing actually.
That is totally amazing, but I think that also is testament to the team that you built. One of Shackleton's kind of core values, he's an absolutely extraordinary leader, optimism. was one of his core values that he would look to over strength, resilience and determination, but that optimistic outlook, and that's a kind of mindset. Yeah. So if you can, it sounds like you had a really tough or horrid, miserable weekend, but if you can come away from that kind of going, what have we learned? That's fills me full of like, it is a challenge what you're doing.
But it's super interesting you bring up the optimism, actually, because I remember that as being sort of the defining feature of the Will de Laszlo
Here we go.
outlook on board. No, you were definitely always the most optimistic person in the crew. But again, it's the diversity of perspectives that helps you to make the good decision, right? Because then you explore the full spectrum of what you might do and what the outcomes might be, and then you find ways to sort of land on a way forwards. I would say I'm optimistic in the sense that I have no doubt that there are solutions to problems, but I'm also quite. I tend to
logically optimistic.
I tend to overestimate how long things will take, and be a little bit more on the cautious side there, and always sort of thinking, I'm sort of always almost expecting everything to go wrong, so that I know that I've thought through, okay, if this does go wrong, I've got an answer to it. If that goes wrong, I've got an answer to it. And then it's always sort of a nice surprise if things work out sort of with plan A, or you get somewhere faster than you think. So it's interesting.
Are you overly optimistic? Are you overly optimistic in terms of, do you think things will take longer than they actually do, or?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So I always tend to like underestimate the speed that we'll make, or assume that some things won't go right.
But those are brilliant kind of mindsets as well, because otherwise I think optimism is a really positive trait. Otherwise, you would often not do things, because if you look at the negatives, things just seem too challenging. But then being a logical and pragmatic optimist, or an optimist with experience, I think is another way of looking at it. It's like, no, bang your head against the wall does not open the door. It doesn't matter how optimist you are. But
there's always a way, but there will probably be some challenges along it. I think is the sort of my general philosophy. I think that's awesome. So there are 3 questions that we like to ask our podcast guests to finish with. The first one is, what's obviously our team name is Sea Change.
Amazing name, by the way. Absolutely amazing name.
Thank you. It's we're pleased with that, and I think it is a sea change that we need to turn things around. But in your life, and with all the work that you do, both GB Row Challenge and Agathos, what would you say is the sea change that you're trying to bring about?
Sea change around GB Row Challenge overall is kind of circling back to policy change and impact. It is a really, really powerful delivery mechanism of invaluable data. So that is a kind of sea change number 1. Sea change number 2, I think for me that's more personal, and this is taking normal people and doing something extraordinary, and the inspiration that can provide. You are a extraordinary team that you've created, all-female team, and the inspiration that will provide to school kids, young adults, females from all walks of life, from all over the world, is immeasurably powerful. And that human spirit of achievement and setting an example of what is the art of the possible, what is possible, and I find that really exciting, because we don't know the impacts of our own actions when other people read or hear about them, but then years later there'll be a feedback loop, which I'm sure many of your team will receive, of, I read about you guys, or I heard about this story and it inspired me to do this, or it made me push further on a charity walk that I was doing, or it got me thinking about the environment, and so I started collecting rubbish every time I went out for a walk, and that kind of impact I find it's unquantifiable. It's but I find that really exciting. So I think the two things, the sea change for GBRO is kind of policy change, if we can collect that data and get it out there, and the human endeavour and inspiration that it provides to people of all walks of life and all over the world.
Love that. That's such a great answer. And I think I know the answer to this, but what can people out there, what's something that everybody can do to help?
Oh, okay. Just come and row around the UK. That's not one. the second piece, if you're not up for that, tell a friend to row around the UK and do that for you. That's the other option. Build a team, go and do that, and take on. Even if you're not interested in science and you're just wanting that kind of human endurance expedition and mental challenge, I couldn't recommend it enough. Seeing the UK from the outside in. Aside from that, if you're not up for those two things, I think small things matter. Really small things matter, and collectively as human beings, with 8 billion of us on the planet, if every single one of us every day went out and collected one piece of rubbish, one piece of plastic, and properly recycled it, the world will be an immeasurably better place. And I'm a great believer in doing small things kind of well. And that I would encourage everybody to just every time you go out for a walk, just pick up one bit of rubbish. And my daughter calls it bit by bit. Why not? Absolutely, or 2 bits of rubbish. Don't be a hero. Don't go and collect masses of bin bags. I mean, you do that once a year. Just every day, go and pick up bits of rubbish and put them into the recycling. And that's, it stops the further degradation of our planet. So that'd be my kind of like one bit of thing that everybody could do if you're not up for running around the UK.
Yeah, it's so true. I think that old saying, we don't need a handful of people doing this perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly.
100%, like an ant colony. If you look at the achievements of what termite hills and ant colonies, they build these kind of amazing kind of structures, and that's just millions of ants or tens of thousands of ants collectively doing something together as one, and that's. That is really powerful, and so more people doing kind of little bits, bit by bit.
And finally, you're an optimist, so I hope you get a good answer to this. What do you see around you that gives you hope?
People, humans are wonderful creatures, animals, mammals, and we collaborate, and collectively we can make real change. And I think what gives me hope is that as a species, we're starting to take this seriously, and that's exciting.
Wonderful. Thank you. I love actually that you mentioned everything that's going on around the coast, and that there are so many initiatives that are starting to do brilliant things, because those are exactly the stories that we want to tell through the Sea Change Row project.
Amazing.
So we're having so much fun already, having just the opportunity to find out about all of these projects and start talking to them, and really look forward to sharing their stories.
I can't wait to hear about some of those stories that have come out. I mean, anecdotally, I've got a farming friend of mine who's got really into kind of planting kelp and seaweed, partly because of the environmental impact that it has kind of on his kind of coastline up in Scotland. We've got a small group who do plastic picking from the beaches, and so there's just there's so much positivity out there, and there's so much goodness that happens, but it's not fast enough, and that's the thing. It's like we have to all remember that the pace needs to pick up. So it's not being overly optimistic. Oh, it's going to be fine. No, it's not fine at the moment until we kind of pull back this tipping point that we're on the verge of. But I can't wait to hear about the stories that you guys collect as you go around the UK, and I think it's what you're pulling off is just mind-blowing as a project, and so exciting, highlighting the kind of goodness that's happening kind of to our seas and oceans around the UK.
Wonderful. Thank you. Will, I could talk to you for hours. We talk to each other for 34 days, so that's, but we'll wrap it up there. But thank you so much for giving us a bit of time in your very, very busy schedule and sharing some of your story, because I think it's such a great story to set the context for everything that we're doing. And thank you for starting this amazing thing.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege to be interviewed by you. A founder, a fellow founder.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Will.
Okay, take care. Bye.